In its wake, the act of suicide leaves behind thousands of new survivors every year. Family members and friends left behind to deal with the consequences and overwhelming grief. There are an estimated 180,000 new survivors of suicide annually. Now, we return to the second half of my special segment, A Son of Suicide. We get a rare inside look at a suicide survivor support group and the special bond between survivors, helping to heal perhaps the deepest wound of all.
So many smiles, so many young people, so much life. These would hardly seem to be the faces of depression, yet these are the faces of suicide.
My name is Melissa Masek, and I lost my brother Jay on June 9th, 1997. He shot himself in the head.
And these are the voices.
She struggled from postpartum depression until she finally took her life.
Of survivors of suicide.
It was such a shock. We can't believe it. He didn't show any of the depression.
Every story is different.
I thought he was okay, and I even talked to him about suicide.
But they all end the same way as my mother's. When Diane Marcus Roy took her life 5 years ago, my sister, my dad, and I gained lifelong memberships in a club with the highest of dues.
I feel totally rejected, like unworthy of living for.
Welcome to a monthly support group called LOSS, Loving Outreach to Survivors of Suicide, run by the Catholic Charities of the Archdiocese of Chicago. Father Charles Ruby has counseled thousands of survivors over the past 22 years.
When you go to a LOSS meeting, you're in a room with other people who know what you're going through, the pain that you're in.
You felt rejected by your mother, and I felt that my mother love wasn't enough for my kids.
What could be worse than losing a child to suicide? Catherine and John Roach lost 2 of their children to suicide. Growing up, brother and sister Paul and Cassie Roach were inseparable. In 1995, Paul told his mom he wanted to talk to a counselor and had thought about taking his life. But before she could get him help, Paul convinced his parents he was fine. On April 4th, 1995, less than 2 weeks after turning 17, the football player with a wide smile committed suicide.
He had taken his life during the night. He hung himself in his closet.
Cassie took it especially hard. The girl who loved to sing was filled with grief and her own personal demons. For a year and a half, she struggled, dropping out of college, seeing a psychiatrist. She was even diagnosed with a chemical imbalance and put on an antidepressant. In the summer of '96, Cassie seemed to have stabilized. That fall, she enrolled as a sophomore at Loyola. But less than 2 weeks later, she ended her life, just like her brother. Same cause of death, hanging.
I can't say that I felt worse because I couldn't ever feel any worse than I did when I lost one child. I mean, it's the worst you can possibly feel. So it's not twice as bad because you're already at the worst place you could be. But it's twice as long.
Twice as long for a grieving process that counselors say usually takes at least 2 years before any sense of normality returns. Even then, survivors are never relieved of all the questions.
There's a lot more questions and there's a lot more to work through when it's a suicide, as opposed to if it was a car accident or if it was cancer.
Most of us have come to realize our loved ones were mentally ill. Now, after 5 years, my sister, my dad, and I still miss my mother every day. But thanks to this support, counseling, and the miracle of time, we are able to feel joy once again.
It just seems as if I can live with it more easily than I could live with it 2 years ago, or 3 definitely.
Even though I am a mom who lost 2 children to suicide, in the end, I have been more blessed than not.
Catherine and John Roach remain very active members of LOSS. I see them every year at the annual LOSS Bruncheon in April, a special and always moving event where